Hello again, it's your old Uncle Jeff with the last travel log of the three, the trip to Europe in 1965. It's September 19th, 2021, so this happened 56 years ago, and I've made a few notes to remind me of the trip. The folks decided that we would spend the whole summer in Europe, 90 plus days, buy a car over there, travel around on our own after doing a 38-day tour, so this was quite the trip. I asked them later, how much did that trip cost? And they said around $10,000. So when you figure in 1965 dollars, that would be a big pile of money. Nowadays, it was back then too. So we flew to New York, stayed a few days there. Mom had a second cousin named Arthur Wingate who lived there. And he came into town, took us to Greenwich Village because he figured as country bumpkin tourists from Minnesota, which is where he was actually from. Although he'd been born in Turkey, he came back to Minnesota. His parents were missionaries. He took us to Greenwich Village so we could go to a sort of a music bar venue and hear beatnik type music. And I kind of chuckled at this because back in those days there was a TV show called The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, and Bob Denver played a beatnik named Maynard G. Krebs. And you know, whenever he heard the word work, he would freak out. My parents decided I should not watch that show because it might affect my work ethic in the future. And so it was kind of funny because here we were listening to that. I remember the bill came for 3 Cokes. It was $14 because there was a $3.50 cover charge to get into the place. So, you know, that'd be a lot of money nowadays. We did a tour of the United Nations, and the tour guide was from India, and she was talking about different programs and things the UN was doing, and I don't remember all the details, but I remember people in the group grumbling that she was anti-American because she was not promoting the United States aspect of everything that they thought she should do, you know, totally discounting the fact that this is an international organization. Even though it was located in New York, it wasn't there to promote American ideals and wave the American flag. But you know, that was sort of that post-war attitude still in patriotic Americans. The parents once again wanted to use a dying form of travel, and they knew that ocean liners going to Europe were going to go out of service soon. So we went over on the Holland American line, Amsterdam, and yeah, big liner, and you know, it was like being in a floating hotel for 7 days. We get to Southampton, go to London. We have a reservation at a hotel recommended by their friends, the Mealhouses, who had been there the year before. However, when Dad goes to the front desk, they don't have their reservation, or they can't find it, or there's something wrong with it, and of course they get kind of snippy with him, and this upsets him, and we go stand out on the sidewalk trying to figure out what to do. And he says, in World War I, when he was in France, he said after the Germans were defeated, they treated the Americans much better than the British did, and he had to drive a British general around in a motorcycle sidecar, and the guy used to always say, "Don't make a bully of yourself," and he kept repeating that. Well, if he really knew what the guy was saying, which is "don't make a bloody ass of yourself," he never would have said those words, because you know, he was taught by his father never to use any bad words, or any words that were replacements for bad words, like, you know, G for Jesus, etc. So they finally got us a room, and we were set. We did some tours on our own. We went to Shakespeare's home up in Stratford, and did a boat tour down the Thames, and we were in this town called Maidstone, and the little tour group was in a churchyard cemetery, and the tour guy was having fun sort of pimping the Americans for history. Did you know this? Do you know that? Because I think he knew that Americans were, if they knew anything, they only knew their own country. They weren't very well educated about the world. And so he says, now, how many of you have heard of Thomas Gray? Nobody said anything. Well, we had just read his poem in English class a few weeks before. So I raised my hand and said, well, he wrote Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard, and the guy was impressed. And we happened to be standing in a churchyard in front of Thomas Gray's parents' above ground crypts, even though that wasn't the churchyard where the elegy was written. So my little feather in my cap that day. we joined their tour. We went on an overnight steamer across to Holland, went through Amsterdam, ended up in Brussels. And it was late in the day. We got up, we had a very nice old-fashioned hotel. I think it was called the Grand Hotel. Get up to the room, and I have to pee, so I go into the bathroom, and it's a huge bathroom, marble fixtures, and they're much larger than a bathroom needed to be. And I go, and I'm peeing in the toilet, and I look down, and I notice the drain is built like one in a sink. And the handles were like faucets, so I turned the handles on to sort of flush it down. And I'm thinking, well, where does the poop go in this toilet? And so I went and told my folks, I said, go look at the toilet in there. I've never seen anything like that. Well, they immediately recognized it, and they said, oh, a bottom washer, which they thought was just the most wonderful invention, and they wanted to buy one and take it back and have it installed in their bathroom somehow. Of course, that was impossible, but they did enjoy that type of post-potty hygiene, I guess, so that was quite a hit with them. The next morning at breakfast, one of the members of the tour group, there were only 13 of us going around in a little 20-seater bus, so we could zip in and out of places quickly. This guy's name was Angelo. He was in his late 70s, and his girlfriend, Carrie, they were from West New York, New Jersey, and they had to explain to everybody that they were widowed and they couldn't get married because Carrie would lose her good Social Security. So they'd been living together some 12 years now, and still good Catholics, but feeling like, quote, they were living in sin, end quote, didn't make any difference to the rest of us. And Angelo announces, does anybody have a foot washer in their bathroom? I have a foot washer. And Carrie's going, Angelo, shush, hush. Because she knows what a bidet is, and I guess some of the other people knew what it was too. And then I sort of told my story of thinking it was a toilet. So we all had a laugh over finding out what a bidet was. We traveled all through Germany and went through castles on the Rhine, and every noon we'd have a hot meal, and every place we stopped wanted to serve us a traditional German meal, which turned out to be Sauerbraten, which are thinly sliced pieces of roast beef that have been marinated in yesterday's gravy and a vinegar sauce, so it makes it a little tart. And it's good. We had it a couple times, and then we realized we were getting it every noon, and it became a running joke that we did not want Sauerbraten, and could Miss Fisher call ahead and see if they could serve us something else besides Sauerbraten. Interestingly enough, the whole time I worked in Germany and on my trips back, I've never once had Sauerbraten offered to me, so maybe it's gone out of favor. When we got to Austria, Mom was urging me to spend some of my money on trinkets or souvenirs, and that just wasn't something I wanted to do. I had about $150 with me, which was a lot of money, and I really wanted to put it in my stamp collection instead. But they went to a bank one day, and the bank showed that they had gold bullion coins and pure silver coins on sale, and Mom thought, well, that's a collectible and it'll have some value, so she talked me into parting with about 70 of my dollars, and I bought the 30 silver pieces and 5 or 6 gold coins, and kept them for years and years. And when I moved to Phoenix and started collecting stamps again around 1986, I took them to the stamp and coin store and said, I might as well sell these, and I got something like $3,200 for them. So the $70 had gone up in value, and I turned around and put it into my stamp collection, just like I wanted to do all along. After Vienna, we drove down through Italy, Venice, and all the way down to the southern tip of Italy in the Isle of Capri. And on the way back, we were going down a smaller road, and there was a gravel pit not 15 or 20 feet from the edge of the road, small gravel pit. And there was a group of teenage boys and girls swimming naked in the gravel pit. And when the bus came by, they all jumped out and stood there, full frontal nudity, and waved at us. And of course, I thought, oh, this is interesting. And of course, everybody in the bus is going, oh, like those Italians. We get to Rome, and the whole group is going to a famous restaurant for pasta. I think it was called Antonio's. And so we're all sitting at this big table, all 13 of us, and the pasta has arrived. And we have sort of an arrogant waiter who's determined that he's going to teach Americans how to properly eat pasta because, of course, Americans just don't know what they're doing. And when I heard that, I thought, this will be interesting because my Nani, my grandmother, had taught me when I was 10, 11, or 12 how to eat continental style, where you hold the fork in your left hand and cut with the right hand and then use the fork in your left hand to eat. And it takes a while to get coordinated with doing that when you're right hand dominant, but I'd mastered it. And so I would eat that way because to me, it made absolutely no sense to cut 1 or 2 pieces of meat, throw your silverware down, switch hands, pick up the fork, eat the 2 pieces of meat, throw that down, switch hands, pick it up, cut it again, and go back and forth, where I could just hold the fork and the knife, cut and eat like this. And somehow my father thought this was just not proper American Emily Post etiquette, and he would peer around the crystal bowl with fake fruit centerpiece on our table and say, you can't eat that way, you have to eat the correct American way. And so I'd do the switching, and I'd make kind of a big effort with it, and then when they got on some other topic, I'd switch back and eat the way I wanted to. So the waiter is showing everybody that you don't use a spoon to eat spaghetti. That's for children learning. You use a knife, hold a fork in your left hand, and you roll the spaghetti against the knife. You cut off the excess, and then you eat it with your left hand. Well, this was going over like a lead balloon with a bunch of Americans that have never eaten with their left hand if they're right hand dominant. And I'm sitting there thinking, ooh, this is going to be fun. So I'm ignoring him, and I'm just rolling my spaghetti against the knife with my left hand and eating it. And he notices I'm doing it, and he says, look, he says, this young man knows how to eat properly. And I look at my parents and go, I couldn't help myself to be a little smug at that. So for the whole summer, I got no pushback on eating continental style. But when we got back, he did announce that I had to go back to the Emily Post method, which, I would do when he was looking and then not do. So that was my fun experience with continental style eating. After Italy, we drove up to southern France. We went to Monaco, where the Monte Carlo casino is, and Dad wanted to go in and win back the 5 francs that he had lost there in 1919 after the war. So he'd been stationed somewhere in southern France. I don't think he actually remembered the name of the place, but he had been to this casino. So I was, 16, so I couldn't go in, but they went in. And a little while later, he came out, and he indeed had invested 5 francs and won 5 francs, and then he quit. We went further on just to Nice, which is just a little ways from Monaco, and my mother had this idyllic idea that the Riviera had these beautiful sand beaches, and there would be elegant women in fashion lying, with fancy hats. And so we wanted to spend an afternoon, and she wanted to look at the fashion because of her store. So we get all our stuff together, and beach towels go down there, and the beach is actually rocky. Rocks about from this size maybe to about this size, no sand anywhere, and went down rather quickly into the water. So you could get in and swim, but you had to be careful. So you had to lie on rocks, and we noticed people in the know brought double and triple towels to lie on to make it comfortable. But you did get to see her elegant women, and of course the French come and they just put a towel around them and then change their clothes, and if the towel falls off, well, so be it. You see somebody's bottom, and of course that was shocking to Americans. Next, we drove north up through Switzerland, and of course that was a lot of mountain driving and beautiful bucolic scenes, but going up a mountain and down a mountain on these switchbacks drove my mother nuts because she had some acrophobia. So fortunately the bus had 6 or 7 empty seats, and so she would get up and switch to the inside seat when we were going down a switchback. Well, sometimes you just in a few hundred yards, you'd then go through another switchback, so she'd have to switch to the other side of the bus, and this became kind of a running joke in Switzerland because she had to switch so many times. And finally I suggested, well, why don't you just close your eyes and look to the inside of the bus, or sit on the inside seat. We ended up in Paris. That was the end of the organized tour. We left, said goodbye to all the people, and then we stayed there for a few days because we met the daughter of a friend from Olivia. She was actually my Sunday school teacher, Rosalie. And we went through the Louvre on our own and the Monet Gallery, and we were at the Place de la Concorde and the Jardin des Tuileries. We had a box lunch. We were sitting on a park bench eating our box lunch, and this elderly lady walks up with a book of tickets and saying something, and we thought she was trying to sell us a lottery ticket, and we said no, and she insisted, pay, you pay. And I said to my mother, well, you took French, why don't you speak with her? And of course, mother got a D in French and didn't like foreign languages, so that wasn't going to go too far, because all she remembered was "Ouvrez la porte, c'est le garçon," and open the door, it is the boy, so that didn't help. So we didn't know what the woman wanted, so we got up to leave, and the woman stomped on my mother's foot because she was so perturbed. We found out later that widows of war veterans are allowed the concession to collect a small fee for your permission to sit on a public park bench like those there, and it was something like 35 centimes, which was 6 or 7 cents. And had we known in advance that that's how it was done, and that was supporting some poor war widow, we would have gladly given her the money, but we thought she was trying to sell us a lottery ticket that we wouldn't be there to collect the winnings from. So now it was time to go to Germany, pick up the Mercedes at the factory in Stuttgart. So we take the train out to Stuttgart, go to the factory, have our delivery day, and that's a big deal. They treat you like royalty. And so we finally got our car, and we're driving out of the factory in Sindelfingen to go back to our little hotel and start our own tour, by ourselves. And Dad starts going down the street, and I said, that's Einbahnstraße, that means one way, don't go down that street. Well, he thought it was the name of the street. And I had 2 years of German. I was getting along okay with my rudimentary German. And of course, people started honking at us and waving their arms, so indeed that's what that was. We drove south to Lindau on Lake Constance. We had a nice visit with my pen pal Hans and his family. We got to go to Liechtenstein and then through Zurich, and then we drove all the way through Germany up to Hamburg, because the big treat was going to be a flight into Berlin, where we could do a visit to East Berlin. You could get on a tour, and then the tour we go across the border at Checkpoint Charlie, and you get a different guide. So this was quite interesting. So we did the West Side tour, and then we went through Checkpoint Charlie, and we got the communist guide on, and she had sort of a memorized lingo to give us, and she said that the wall, of course, was built to keep the West Berliners out of East Berlin because they were coming over and bothering all the people that were living under communism, because they liked communism so much. And of course everybody chuckled and looked at each other, and they showed us all the boring Soviet-style architecture and blocks of houses and apartments, I mean. And she was pointing out that how everybody had an apartment at a reasonable rate, and everybody had some sort of work, and everybody had free health care, and all this. And of course all the Americans on the tour are thinking, this is socialism, and this is communism, and this is all bad. And indeed it looked kind of bad back then, because they were not prosperous compared to West Berlin. And when we came back, of course, they slid mirrors on rollers under the bus to make sure no East German was clinging to the underside of the bus. So that sort of gave away the fact that I don't think too many West Germans were trying to get over the fence into East Berlin. We get back to Hamburg. We drive up to Denmark, where Dad's sister Louise lived with her husband. She had been born in the States but moved to Denmark. Dad was sort of in his glory there, because it woke up his old Norwegian dialect from the West Coast Norway that he'd learned in South Dakota, and he also knew Danish from back then, and he was able to speak both languages with everybody there, and just feel that he was fitting right in. Mom and I, of course, needed translation, but Louise and Chris, her husband, both spoke English, so that was fine. We then went to Copenhagen, but it was August and we didn't have a reservation in a hotel, and we couldn't get one on the phone, so we just went there and did cold calls through the Tourist Information Bureau, and they finally got us a place about 25 miles north of town in a small hotel with 3 or 4 stories, a wooden hotel, very quaint, and we got the room that was way up in the attic, so it had sloped ceilings and dormer windows, and in one of the dormer window seats was a burlap bag with a big rope coming out of it tied to a big turnbuckle. My mother said to the bellboy, "What's that?" And he opened the bag up, pulled the rope out, and showed this big rope with knots on it. And he said, "Oh, that's the fire escape." He said, "In case of a fire, you throw it out the window and you crawl down the rope hanging onto the knots." And my mother turned pale, and I looked at my father, knowing that she had a great fear of hotel fires because she'd grown up in Minneapolis in the early teens and 20s, 1910 and 1920, when there had been a couple of very devastating hotel fires where everybody died that was above the 4th floor. So there was no fire, but we got a kind of a kick out of that one. After Copenhagen, we left the car in a car park and got on a train to go to Norway via Sweden. There was no bridge to Sweden at this point, so the train was actually put on a ferry, went across to Sweden, and through Sweden up to Norway, up to Oslo, took another train out to Bergen, took a fjord steamer up to Sognefjord, where Vadheim was located, where Dad's parents both came from. And we got there and stepped off the fjord steamer, and there was Dad dressed in his American-style clothing, but he spoke their dialect, and in the 19th century version. The Norwegian had undergone a language normalization about 1905, and they created New Norsk, which was the Western dialect, and Bokmål, which is sort of the main dialect of Oslo. And they were just amazed that this man spoke their dialect, but like Grandma and Grandpa used to speak. So that was a fun visit for the little bit of time we were there. We eventually get back to Copenhagen, then pick up the car, drive to the southernmost island of Denmark, take the ferry across to Germany, drive to Rotterdam in the Netherlands, because that's where the ship is going back, the New Amsterdam. Actually, we came over on the Rotterdam. I got that wrong, and we went back on the New Amsterdam. Anyway, the car was put on the ship. We went over to New York. The car was brought out. We loaded it up, went to the Holland Tunnel, and drove home in 3 days. So it was a very educational trip, and I learned a lot of things. I didn't talk about all the touristy things we saw. Of course, we saw everything that people see when they go to Europe. But the experiences and all these little vignette stories that happened were much more educational to me. And I think my parents too. So I think the next vlog will be about my mom's life after she and Dad sold their stores and after my father's death, because she still had a very interesting life.